Ilara had buried her heart alongside her husband, vowing the silence of the dust-choked plains would be her only companion for the rest of her days. The silence was a shroud she wore willingly, a barrier against a world that had taken everything and given nothing back. For 5 years, the wind was her only conversation, the creak of her porch swing her only song. But silence had a sound, and on this day, it sounded like the rasping cough of a dying man and the thin, hungry cries of his children. The land next to hers, the sprawling Blackwood Creek Ranch, was dying with its owner. She had come to buy it, to absorb its acreage into her own solitude, to give the hollow ache in her chest a task to perform. It was meant to be a simple transaction of dust and sorrow, a final signature from a man already turning to ghost. She found Liam Blackwood not in a study over ledgers, but slumped in a chair on his porch, a threadbare blanket pulled around his skeletal frame. The prairie sun was merciless, bleaching the life from the wood, the land, and the man himself. Beside him, in a wooden crate padded with yellowed linens, 2 infants fretted, their faces flushed with fever, their cries too weak to carry far. They were twins, born of a mother the earth had claimed in the birthing bed. Ilara stood before them, the legal papers in her hand feeling obscene and trivial. She had come for acres, for fences, for water rights. She had not come for this. His eyes, sunken and clouded with pain, found hers. They held no fight, only a terrifying, pleading exhaustion. "The price is agreed," he rasped, each word a shard of glass in his throat. His gaze drifted to the crate. "But they are part of the land." Part of the deal. Ilara felt a cold dread mix with an emotion so old and buried she could not name it. She, who had prayed to a deaf god for a child, who had felt her own body betray her month after empty month, was now being offered too. Not as a gift, but as a burden attached to a deed. The wind picked up, swirling dust around her worn boots, a mournful sound that seemed to snake into the cabin where the shadows were deep and long. "I am not a mother," she said, her voice flat, a stone dropping into a deep well. It was a fact, a shield she had used for years. Liam's hand, frail and trembling, lifted slightly from the blanket. "Neither am I a father anymore," he whispered, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "I am just the time before their graves." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. She looked from his desperate face to the 2 small, red-faced infants, their tiny chests heaving with the same sickness that was consuming their father. She saw the end of their story written in the unforgiving sky. And in that moment, the solitude she had so carefully curated felt not like peace, but like a tomb. She gave a single, sharp nod. The transaction was made. She had not just bought a dying ranch, she had bought the flicker of 2 small, guttering flames, and the ghost who guarded them. The journey back to her own cabin was a silent, grim procession. Ilara carried 1 infant, swaddled tightly against her chest, its feverish heat a strange and alarming weight. Liam, leaning heavily on her shoulder, carried the other, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. Her home, once a bastion of sterile quiet, was instantly violated by the sounds of suffering. The air, which had been still and scented only with dried herbs and wood smoke, was now thick with the metallic smell of sickness and the sour scent of unwashed linens. She settled them inside, the cabin suddenly feeling small, cramped, and overwhelmingly alive. She laid the babies, Finn and Rose he named them in a faint whisper, in a drawer pulled from her dresser and padded with her softest wool blankets. It was a crude cradle, but it was clean and warm. Then she turned to Liam. She helped him to her own bed, the one her husband had built, the one she hadn't slept in for 5 years, preferring a pallet by the cold hearth. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She worked with a detached efficiency that was her hallmark. She stoked the fire until it blazed, casting dancing shadows on the walls and chasing the chill from the room. She heated water, tearing strips from her own bedsheets for cloths. She bathed the children first, their tiny, frail limbs trembling under her careful hands. Their skin was hot to the touch, their whimpers small, kittenish sounds that pulled at something deep inside her. She washed their soiled clothes and hung them to dry by the fire, the sight of the tiny garments a stark, painful reminder of the life she had been denied. All the while, Liam watched her from the bed. His eyes followed her every move, a silent, burning intensity in their depths. He did not speak, did not ask for anything. He simply watched as she moved from the babies to the hearth, from the water basin to his own bedside, wiping his brow with a cool, damp cloth. The work was relentless, a cycle of feeding, cleaning, and comforting that bled the hours together. She coaxed spoonfuls of watered-down goat's milk into the babies' mouths, her large, calloused fingers looking clumsy and foreign as she handled the tiny spoon. She forced broth between Liam's pale lips, ignoring his weak protests. This was not tenderness. It was a duty. It was the fulfillment of a bargain she had made. But as the night deepened and the fire burned low, she sat in a chair between the makeshift cradle and the bed, the profound silence of the plains pressing in around the small circle of light. She found herself watching the steady, shallow rise and fall of Finn's chest, her hand resting instinctively on Rose's back, feeling the fragile flutter of her heartbeat. The wall she had built around her heart began to show its first cracks. A warmth, faint and unfamiliar, seeped through. It was not joy, not yet. It was something far more raw and elemental, purpose. The barren plains outside were no longer a reflection of her soul, but a wilderness from which she had rescued something precious. A week bled into the next. A fragile rhythm established itself within the four walls of the cabin, a rhythm dictated by fevers and feedings, by the rasp of Liam's cough and the weak cries of his children. Ilara moved through the days like a phantom, her own needs, for sleep, for food, for solace, secondary to the relentless demands of her new charges. The fortress of her grief was being dismantled, not by a sudden assault, but by the steady, persistent chipping away of routine. She learned the specific timbre of each baby's cry. Finn's was a sharp, angry demand, while Rose's was a thin, mournful wail that threatened to break what was left of Ilara's heart. She learned to soothe them, her hands, once accustomed only to the rough textures of rope and soil, becoming surprisingly gentle. One afternoon, as she was rocking Rose, whose fever had finally broken, she felt a strange peace settle over her. The child's small head rested in the crook of her neck, her breathing evening out into the soft sighs of sleep. It was a weight both profound and terrifying. From the bed, Liam spoke, his voice clearer than it had been in days. "You have good hands," he said. Ilara didn't turn. She kept her eyes fixed on the sleeping child. "They are working hands," she replied, her tone clipped. "They know their use, they know kindness," he corrected softly. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside. It was later that day that the rhythm was broken. Her dog, a grizzled old hound named Dust, let out a low growl from the porch, the hair on his back rigid. Ilara's head snapped up. Dust never growled without cause. She gently placed Rose back in the drawer cradle next to her sleeping brother and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. A rider was approaching. He was a large man on a powerful black horse, his shape a dark, imposing blot against the pale sky. He rode not like a friendly neighbor, but like a man coming to claim something. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. She felt Liam stir in the bed behind her. "Silas," he breathed, and the name was a curse. "My wife's brother." Ilara's hand went to the heavy iron poker resting by the hearth. The man, Silas, dismounted without waiting for an invitation, his boots crunching on the dry earth with an arrogant finality. He strode onto her porch and hammered on the door, the force of the blows shaking the entire cabin. Ilara opened it, positioning her body to block the entrance. Silas was even larger up close, his face weathered and cruel, his small eyes taking in her plain dress and severe expression with a dismissive sneer. "I've come for what's mine," he said, his voice a low rumble. He tried to peer past her into the cabin. "Liam signed papers. With me. The ranch belongs to the family. Not to some barren widow playing house." The word barren struck her with the force of a slap. It was a truth she had lived with, but hearing it used as a weapon by this brute ignited a cold, protective fury she had never known. "The ranch is mine," she stated, her voice dangerously quiet. "The deed is signed." "It's legal." Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Legal? He's dying. Not of sound mind. A judge will see it my way. And I'll not be saddled with his sick runts. His gaze flickered with contempt towards the sound of a baby's cough from within. They belong in an orphanage. Or in the ground with him. It makes no difference to me. In that instant, Ilara's purpose crystallized. It was no longer about a bargain or land, or even a promise to a dying man. It was about the 2 small lives in the cradle drawer. They were hers. She had washed them, fed them, held them through feverish nights. This man saw them as obstacles. She saw them as her own. She did not raise her voice. She did not move. But her grip on the door frame tightened, her knuckles white. "Get off my land," she said, each word perfectly spaced, as hard and cold as river stones. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not a grieving woman, but something unyielding, something primal. He saw a guardian. He spat on the ground near her feet. "I'll be back," he snarled. "And I'll bring the law with me. This isn't over." He turned and mounted his horse, casting one last hateful glare at the cabin before riding away, a solitary shadow shrinking against the vast, indifferent horizon. Ilara closed the door, the heavy thud sealing them inside, her heart hammering against her ribs not with fear, but with a fierce, defiant resolve. The threat of Silas's return hung in the air, as heavy and oppressive as the gathering clouds on the horizon. A storm was coming. The sky turned a bruised purple-grey, and the wind began to howl, rattling the window panes and clawing at the roof. The landscape, once merely empty, now felt menacing, mirroring the turmoil that had breached the cabin walls. Inside, the baby's sickness returned with a vengeance, their coughs growing deeper, more ragged. The fever spiked in both of them, and their small bodies were slick with sweat. Ilara worked with a frantic, desperate energy, her earlier calm shattered. She brewed teas from yarrow and willow bark, ancient remedies her grandmother had taught her. She kept cool cloths on their foreheads, murmuring soft, soothing words that were more for her own benefit than theirs. Liam had faded. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing a shallow, painful struggle. The storm outside intensified, dust and debris lashing against the cabin in a furious assault. The world was reduced to the dim, wavering light of a single lantern and the roar of the wind. Ilara felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling that she and these 3 souls were the only things left in a world being torn apart. Liam's eyes fluttered open. They were lucid, startlingly clear in the dim light. He reached out a trembling hand, not for himself, but towards the drawer where his children lay gasping for air. Ilara moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. It was cold, the life force already receding. "The storm," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "He will use it." Ilara knew he meant Silas. He would come back when the roads were impassable, when no help could reach them. "I will not let him," she said, the promise a raw vow torn from her very soul. Liam's gaze held hers, a desperate, final plea. He struggled to push himself up, his eyes fixed on her face. The effort was monumental, a last surge of paternal will against the tide of death. "You saved them," he whispered, the words barely audible over the screaming wind. "From the sickness. From me. You saved us." He fumbled with something under his pillow, his fingers weak. He pressed a small object into her palm. It was a wooden bird, crudely but lovingly carved, its wings half spread as if in mid-flight. "For Rose," he breathed. "I was making one, for Finn." His strength gave out. He fell back against the pillow, his chest rising once, then twice, and then falling still. The silence he left behind was immense, a vacuum that even the raging storm could not fill. Ilara stood frozen, his last words echoing in the space he had just vacated. "You saved us." It was not an accusation, but a benediction. A transfer of trust. A gift of purpose more real and binding than any legal deed. She closed her fingers tightly around the small wooden bird, its rough edges digging into her skin. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, the fight had changed. It was no longer a battle against sickness, but a vigil. She sat between the still form of the father and the struggling breaths of his children, a lone sentinel in the heart of the tempest, waiting for the dawn and the war it would bring. She was not the same woman who had come to buy a plot of land. That woman was gone, scoured away by fever and fear and a dying man's final, sacred trust. The storm broke just before sunrise. The wind died down to a weary sigh, and a pale, watery light began to filter through the dust-streaked window. The air outside was washed clean, the sky a fragile, hopeful blue. Inside the cabin, the quiet was absolute. Liam's body lay shrouded on the bed. By some small miracle, the fevers had broken. Finn and Rose were sleeping soundly, their breathing deep and even for the first time in days. Their faces, though still pale, had lost the flush of sickness. They had survived the storm, both inside and out. Ilara worked through the morning with a heavy, deliberate grace. She carried Liam's body outside, to the small, windswept plot where her husband was buried. She dug for hours, her muscles screaming in protest, her grief a solid, unmovable weight in her chest. She was not just burying a man she barely knew, she was burying a promise, a final chapter of a life that had become intertwined with her own. She fashioned a simple wooden cross, carving his name into it with her husband's old knife, Liam Blackwood. As she pushed the last of the soil into place, she saw them. 3 riders on the ridge, dark silhouettes against the bright morning sun. It was Silas, and he had brought 2 other men with him. Her heart did not pound with fear. It settled into a cold, hard resolve. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked back to the cabin, wiped the dirt from her hands, and stood on the porch, waiting. The small, carved bird was tucked safely in the pocket of her dress. The deed to the land was on the mantelpiece, but she knew it was not a piece of paper that would save them. The 3 men rode up and stopped a few yards from the porch, their horses shifting uneasily. Silas's face was a mask of smug triumph. He gestured with his thumb towards the 2 thuggish-looking men beside him. The law couldn't make it through the storm, he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. So I brought my own. He dismounted, his intentions clear. He was here to take the ranch by force. The land is mine, woman. And the brats are going to the county orphanage. Get out of the way. Ilara did not move. She looked past Silas, at the 2 men he had brought with him. Their eyes darted nervously from her to the cabin, to the fresh grave on the hill. They were hired muscle, not men with a personal stake in this fight. She fixed her gaze on them, her expression devoid of fear, filled only with an unshakable certainty. The man who owned this land is buried on that hill, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying in the still morning air. He left his children in my care. This is their home now. And I am their mother. The word hung in the air, powerful and irrefutable. It was the first time she had said it aloud, and the truth of it resonated deep in her bones. Silas scoffed. You? A mother? You're nothing. He took a step forward, his hand reaching for the porch rail. Get her, he ordered the other men. But they didn't move. They saw the look in her eyes. It was not the look of a frightened widow. It was the fierce, unwavering glare of a she-bear protecting her cubs. They saw the fresh grave, the tidy cabin, the quiet determination that radiated from her like heat from a forge. They saw a woman who would die on this porch before she let them pass. And they realized they were on the wrong side of this fight. Silas, enraged by their hesitation, lunged forward himself. Ilara stood her ground. She did not flinch. She simply held his gaze, her entire being a silent, screaming testament to her new role. He stopped, inches from her, his brutish force crashing against the immovable object of her will. He saw he could not win. He could throw her aside, he could burn the cabin to the ground, but he could not break the spirit that now animated her. He could not defeat a mother. With a choked cry of pure frustration, Silas turned, shoving past his own men. He mounted his horse and, without a backward glance, spurred it into a gallop, fleeing the place that held no victory for him. The other 2 men lingered for a moment, then turned their horses and rode away slowly, leaving Ilara alone in the quiet morning. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her body trembling with the aftermath of the confrontation. From inside the cabin, a baby began to cry, a strong, healthy, demanding sound. It was the sound of the future. She turned and went inside, her heart no longer a buried thing, but a fierce and vital organ, beating in time with the new lives she had claimed as her own. The ranch was hers. The children were hers. And for the first time in a very long time, Ilara was whole. The silence of the plains was no longer empty, it was filled with promise.